you are controlling, right? Again, even though you may not see it, you are controlling. I guarantee you that there's aspects of that, okay? Because control is like, it's an interesting phenomenon, right? You can be the most subtle and the kindest person, yet still execute control in your marriage. Or you can be the, typical alpha dog who's obviously controlling and without any shame controlling. And then there's everything in between, right? I gave you the two kind of spectrums, the kind and the alpha, or I guess some call it beta. Um, and then everything else in between, right? You control, as I said, can be unintentional. It can be intentional. Now, intentional being like, I just want to kind of deep dive into that. Like, intentional means that you are controlling on purpose, and you know very well that you are controlling, okay? Unintentional, on the other hand, is that when you're controlling from this unintentional place, you're actually unaware that you are doing it. You're doing it, it has an impact, but you're unaware about it. Now, either way, here's the key thing to understand. Both are driven by insecurities that are actually forcing you to be in survival mode, okay? In the hope of maintaining some sort of certainty in your marriage, in your life. Because when you feel in control, you feel a level of certainty that is calming for you. If you feel out of control, it's not a comfortable place to be. And there's survival behaviors that we tend to develop because of our insecurities that have us behave in a way that wants us to seize control, right? The problem is that it comes with a price, because nobody wants to be controlled, right? Or at least nobody wants to feel controlled, and your wife will feel controlled, right? It's not an if, but a when. Now, there are certain situations where control is needed, and believe it or not, there are situations where you should be controlling, okay? So this is what we're going to discuss. We're going to discuss what are the things to focus on to recognize where you should be, when you should be controlling, and where you should not be controlling, okay? With like certainty and clarity. All right. And the first component, or the first area to look at, are your terms. Terms as a way to actually be controlling, okay? For anybody who's new, terms are the total sum of your masculine identity, okay? You already have terms, usually between 1 and 4, minimum 1, maximum 4, no more than that, okay? The process that you need to go through is identifying them, if you haven't already, okay? Terms are the only thing you can control in your life and marriage, and they do not depend on anybody else, not even your wife. You have full control of your terms. I am a man that takes care of his family's safety, security, financially, emotionally, physically. One of my terms. My other term is I am a man that makes a difference in other men's lives. Those are my two terms. I have two terms. These I do not compromise, okay? And you should never compromise your terms, especially for the marriage or the relationship, because what starts to happen is you start to become pretentious, right? When you do that, you are pretending to be someone you're not. You won't be true to who you are, which means that you would essentially be lying to your wife, because you would be pretending to be a different man than who you really are, right? And as a husband, for you to not do that, you got to identify your terms, become very clear about it, and then surrender to the commitment of not compromising them ever. Okay? Now, this is within your terms. You got full control. Now let's look at the next part, right? Like, what happens outside of your terms? So outside of your terms, you should never be controlling at all. Okay? And believe it or not, like, it actually makes your life easier when you know your terms, because it starts to guide you where to control and where not to. So I gave you my two terms, And you're probably thinking, holy shit, like that's the only two areas where he controls. And I'm telling you, without any hesitation, it is more than enough. When you take those two terms and you actually spread them out, map them out across your entire life, including marriage, work, business, friends, kids, whatever, all areas, it's not like, to uphold those two terms and not compromise them, like it's a lot of control. Okay, so don't think because I said it so succinctly that it's, oh my god, it's a lot of control. Okay, now the thing with terms also that I guess I'll call it the sandpit analogy. Okay, terms create kind of like a sandpit with the borders around it. Okay, your terms being the borders. Now, in this sandpit, your wife can manage the relationship, and it creates safety for your wife because she will only manage the relationship outside of your terms. That gives her clarity, right? And the terms giving the border, she understands, and you'll gain her respect because you know your terms and because you're holding up your terms. Okay? So from you to her, it becomes a great service to the relationship, because when you know your terms and you don't compromise them, it gives that clarity for her by being able to know what to manage the relationship within, and knowing that you're not going to compromise who you are as a man for the relationship. And that's how you actually let her know about the boundaries, because she will test you to try to have you compromise your terms. And when you keep committing to not compromising them, doesn't matter if it pisses her off or not, she will respect you for that. And she'll start to figure out what these boundaries are in which she can manage the relationship. So it's a huge service and important. Okay? I have never spoken to my wife about my terms, like ever. But yet, if you were to ask her, she would be able to tell you who I am as a man because of how I've been showing up. Okay. Now, the caveat with terms is that they're not enough. Terms alone are just not enough to gain to gain control back of control, if you will. Okay, because this is what we are talking about: is how do you know where to control and how do you know where not to? And terms alone are not enough. Okay, knowing your terms is a great compass, guidance to get rid of the unnecessary control in your marriage. Because once you know what's outside of your terms, you know not to control there. But a man, in addition to knowing his terms, needs to become emotionally self-sufficient. Because if you are not, then the emotional triggers when your wife says X, Y, Z, that it takes place, will push you to compromise your term if emotional self-sufficiency is not in place. Okay? So in other words, if a man has not pulled his bullets, his insecurities, then the emotional trigger will overpower and have him compromise himself, even though he knows his terms. So that this means that in addition to knowing your terms as a man, father, and husband, you must also become emotionally self-sufficient, emotionally in control of your emotions, so that you are complementing the other threat. You get to know your terms, you commit to not compromising them, and then you become emotionally self-sufficient, fully in control of your emotions. So it doesn't matter what your wife says, your commitment to your terms will stay intact because you do not get triggered.
Yeah, and there's actually a great way for men to check in with themselves, right? To see where they're at emotionally. Okay. And it's as simple as asking this question, are there things in my life that I am doing, but I know not to do? Or perhaps there are things that I'm not doing in my life, which I know to do. And you can look at this and you can take that question for any area of your life, whether it's your finances, your health, your spiritual domain. If you answer that question honestly, will actually give you direction around the areas to work on to improve your self-sufficiency. Because depending on your answer to those questions, a lot of it will be driven by your bullets. But if you're doing something you know not to do, there's a fundamental reason why you're doing that, which 99.999% of the time is related to a bullet. It's related to your emotional insufficiency rather than sufficiency.